He was the only man in the city who knew that two enemy spy centers shared a secret phone line through his switching room. The mistake that put him in their way wasn't sabotage. It wasn't espionage. It was a pencil note. One extra line in a maintenance log. One circle around a number that wasn't supposed to be there. That was all it took to touch a Cold War hotline nobody officially owned. He wasn't a spy. He didn't carry a gun. He didn't have a diplomatic passport. He didn't know any secret code words. He wore a gray shirt, a faded company badge, and boots with cable dust ground into the seams. He was a night phone tech. 42 years old. Divorced. One son in another city who thought his father fixed telephones and had no idea what that actually meant. If you lived in that supposedly neutral European capital in the last years of the Cold War, you probably never saw him. But your voice went through his hands. Every time you called your mother, your office, your embassy, your lover, your travel agent, somewhere in the dark, a relay clicked, a trunk lit up, a cross-connection closed. He listened for bad contacts and phantom noises so that you never thought about the wires at all. That was the job. The central switching building didn't look like much from the street. Just a heavy stone block with narrow windows and a row of tired antennas on the roof. No sign said, "Here." All your conversations are sorted like laundry. The front door had a buzzer and a bored security guard with a newspaper. During the day, the place hummed with clerks, engineers, managers, inspectors. At night, it belonged to the machines, and to a skeleton crew of people like him. The main floor was a forest of metal racks, rows and rows of switching frames, cables hanging in bundles, little lamps blinking in nervous patterns. The air smelled like dust, warm plastic, and a faint trace of ozone from the old relays. The sound was never silence. Clicks, chatter from relay banks, low hum of power supplies. If you didn't know what you were hearing, it was just noise. If you did, it was the city breathing through copper. He knew. He could walk between the racks with his eyes half closed and tell, from the feel of the air and the pattern of clicks, if something wasn't right. His world was numbers and lines. Local loops, trunks, international circuits, priority channels. Most of them had labels. Some had warning signs. Government. Others had little red tags with 3 letters that meant, "Do not touch without permission, you do not have." He touched them only when the job told him to. He didn't ask what conversations went through them. Ministers, ambassadors, spies. All of them sounded the same as static from his side of the rack. Every night shift began with the same ritual. He sat at the test console near the middle of the hall and pulled the daily usage printout. Endless lines of numbers, route codes, durations, call counts. He scanned for anomalies, circuits with too much traffic, circuits with none, lines that looked dead when they shouldn't be, outages you could see on paper before anyone complained on the street. Mostly, it was boring. The city's voice traffic ebbed and flowed like a tide. Rush hour spikes, dinner time lulls, drunks trying to find taxis at 2 in the morning. After 20 years, the patterns felt like weather to him. You noticed when the sky changed. That month, something in the sky changed. It started as a small annoyance in the logs. A trunk group he barely thought about, Route 43 Delta, kept showing activity when it was supposed to be idle. According to the routing plan pinned above his desk, 43 Delta was a reserve transit group. It connected one of the city's diplomatic exchanges to an international gateway. In theory, it was for contingency use only. In practice, it was almost never used. Most traffic took more modern routes, but in the last weeks, 43 Delta kept lighting up for short bursts at strange hours. A few minutes before midnight. Again, around 3 in the morning. Never long enough to show up as alarms. Just long enough to add a smear of usage to the graph. At first he shrugged. Old trunks sometimes ghosted. Voltage spikes made counters lie. But the pattern repeated. Same times, same durations. He circled the entries on the printout, wrote a small question mark next to 43D. Probably miscount, he told himself. Then, one night, the miscount clicked. He was tracing a complaint from a government office. Lines crackling. Intermittent dropouts on intercity calls. He followed the numbers from the complaint through the routing tables. Local exchange. Transit hub. Out to a trunk group. He walked through the racks, following the physical cables that matched the logical path. Neat lines on paper, messy bundles in metal. He fixed a loose jumper, cleaned an oxidized contact, swapped a suspect card. On his way back to the console, he passed the frame for 43 Delta. 14 trunks. Old equipment, but still serviceable. Each had a tiny indicator showing whether it was busy. They were all dark, as they should be. He took 2 more steps. One lamp flickered on. He stopped. The busy lamp glowed steady for a moment, then went dark. He glanced at the wall clock. 23:57. Right on schedule with those strange little spikes in the logs. He frowned, went back to the console and pulled an instantaneous usage meter on 43 Delta. There it was. 1 channel in use. No recorded originating number. No destination number. No billing record. On paper, no call existed. But the hardware knew one circuit was busy. Someone had found a way to make a call through 43 Delta without telling the system that a call existed. He looked at the lamp again. Off. Duration. 3 minutes. Too short for a normal diplomatic conference. Too long for a misfire. His skin prickled. He could have written, possible phantom seizure, investigate later, and left it. He should have. Instead, he did what he always did when something bothered him. He followed the wire. He took his handheld line tracer and plugged it into the 43 Delta frame. The light, the tone, told him which bundle carried the mystery circuit. He walked the cable along the rack, listening for the faint beep through the plastic. Up 1 frame. Across a support bar. Down into the floor. He took the stairs to the lower level, where old ducts ran like buried rivers. Down there it was darker, dustier. Only emergency lights glowed, giving the concrete corridor a submarine feel. He followed the cable through the maze of ducts. Label plates on the wall told him where they were going. 43 Delta normally fed a patch bay that connected out to a heavily guarded room, the diplomatic exchange. From there, cables went to embassies, government buildings, places with flags on the roofs. But the cable he followed from the busy trunk didn't go where the drawing on his clipboard said it should. At one junction, the tray split. Most of the bundle went right to the labeled diplomatic room. A smaller bunch peeled left through a hole in the wall with no label at all. His tracer beep pointed left. He frowned. The hole was old, roughly drilled, framed with rust. Someone had cut into the duct after the original construction. The cable snaked through into a space that, on his official map, was solid concrete. He stood there for a moment, the sound of his tracer beeping softly against the hum of the building. Then he did what no one ever wanted techs to do. He trusted his map in his head more than the one on company paper. He went after it. The unmarked opening led into a narrow, low service passage. He had to duck under pipes. Dust floated in the light of his small flashlight. Rats had left droppings along the wall. The cable ran along rusted brackets, around a bend, then up toward a locked steel door with no sign. The door had a modern lock on old hinges, not company standard. He put his ear to it. He heard a faint electric hiss. Equipment. He went back upstairs by another route. This one he remembered from a fire drill years earlier. On the floor plan, this unmarked room sat between two important worlds. On one side, the diplomatic exchange for one superpower's embassy quarter. On the other, the international gateway that carried traffic to the other superpower's lines and beyond. He stared at the diagram. The unmarked room was exactly where those two nervous arteries came closest to touching. In theory, they were separated by regulations, security, layers of policy. In reality, someone had threaded a cable through a hole in the wall. He swallowed. Then he went back to the console and did the only thing he officially could. He wrote it down. In the maintenance log for that night, he added a line. 43 Delta. Unexplained usage. Line trace shows secondary routing through undocumented duct. Room between diplomatic X and Intel gateway. Recommend physical inspection and documentation. He underlined undocumented. He drew a small circle around the route code. He closed the log, signed his name, and put it in the tray for the day shift supervisor. Then he went back to chasing hissy lines and replacing old fuses. By the time his shift ended, he had almost convinced himself he'd just found a forgotten piece of old infrastructure. It was easier to believe in negligence than in anything else. 3 days later, he opened the same logbook and found his own handwriting, changed. The sentence was still there, but the word undocumented had a thin line through it. In the margin, in a different pen, someone had written, "Old reserve routing, no issue, no further action required." Their initials sat beside it. His supervisor's, but his supervisor hadn't said anything to him in the last 3 days. No good catch. No, you were wrong, it's fine. When he caught him in the hallway and said, "About that 43 Delta anomaly," the man smiled the thin, tired smile of someone who had been told to stay out of something. "Some old work from the late 60s, he said. "Paperwork never caught up, we've checked it. Nothing for you to worry about." He clapped him on the shoulder. "Focus on the real faults. People yelling about noisy lines. Leave the ghosts alone." His tone was light. His eyes were not. He moved on before a follow-up question could form. The tech stood in the corridor, logbook still in his hands, pulse hammering in his throat. Checked by who? He thought. It clearly wasn't him. He could have let it die there, let the pencil line be the last time he touched 43 Delta. He almost did. Then, one night, the alarm panel flickered. Not with red lights, with something quieter. A subtle change in the utilization graph for trunk groups tied to the embassies. A pattern. At the same time, 43 Delta did its ghost call near midnight. 2 other groups blipped. One linked to the Eastern Bloc embassies. One linked to the Western. Tiny bursts of traffic, too short and too rare to ping billing, but they lined up like 3 points on a triangle. His stomach went cold. He looked at the wall diagram again, at the unmarked room between those 2 nodes, at the pencil line in the log that someone had tried to smooth away. He sat alone in the switching hall, lit by green indicator lamps and the faint glow of his console. He watched the clock creep toward midnight. At 23:56, he made a decision. If someone else was going to treat his network like a private path, he wanted to hear what walked through it. He walked to the 43 Delta frame with his test set. Not the big console, the small battered handset with crocodile clips that techs used to listen for dial tone and line noise. He connected it to the same circuit whose lamp had flickered before. In his ear, the line was empty, just the low, smooth hiss of an open trunk, the floor noise of the world. He watched the clock on the wall. 23:57. The busy lamp lit. In his ear, the noise changed. not the click and dial pulses of an ordinary call. A short burst of tone, like somebody sending a key. Then a peculiar silence, a silence with texture. He heard faint choppy sounds, like a machine breathing, then voices. Not normal voices, they were too clean, too regular, as if they weren't being spoken into the line but played through it. The language was one he understood only in fragments, not his native tongue, but one he'd heard on foreign broadcasts his whole life. He picked up bits. Nothing dramatic, no launch, no attack. Just numbers, code words, times, places that meant nothing to him. Then another voice took over on the same line, this one in a different language. Also foreign. Also on tape, too flat to be live. It was like listening to two automated briefings back to back. One from one side, one from the other. A machine readout of messages meant for people who knew what to do with them. And under it, every few seconds, he heard a phrase in his own language. They weren't part of the speeches. They were technical markers. Switch to channel A. Confirm secure transverse. The phrase that made his hand tighten on the handset was simple. Via City Center Node 3. Black Road confirmed stable. City Center Node 3 was his building. The Black Road was 43 Delta and its unlabeled branch. Someone was using his switching center as a secret transit corridor. Not between his government and theirs. Between two foreign services who preferred to pretend they never spoke directly. He closed his eyes for a second, listening to the ghostly briefing pass through his ear. He realized that if anyone caught him on this line, they'd assume he wasn't just fixing noise. The busy lamp glowed steady, like an unblinking eye. The transmission lasted a little under 3 minutes. Then there was another burst of strange tone. The line went back to its soft hiss. The lamp went dark. He stayed frozen for a long heartbeat. Then his test set clicked in his ear. Not from the trunk, from the building. He heard another line open somewhere else in the hall, a patch panel link he recognized by pitch. His name drifted over the intercom, distorted but clear. Requesting technician name to central office. Now, please. The voice wasn't one of the usual night dispatchers. Different cadence. Too crisp. He looked down the long row of racks. In the distance, at the far end of the hall near the supervisor's office, he saw movement. 2 figures in suits, not overalls, stepping through the door. One of them looked up and scanned the forest of frames. Even from here, the tech felt the glance like a hand. They were not supposed to be here at this hour. He was not supposed to be on this line at this moment. The handset in his palm suddenly felt heavy. He disconnected it quietly, set it down on top of the frame as if he'd just finished a routine test, and started walking toward the light at the end of the row. His heart thudded against his ribs with every step. As he approached, one of the men in suits stepped forward. He had an ID badge on a lanyard that did not belong to the telephone company. The man smiled a professional, empty smile. "Good evening," he said. "Sorry to disturb your shift. We'd like to ask you a few questions about an interesting line you found in the logs last week." He held up a page, the maintenance log. The tech saw his own handwriting on it, the circled 43 Delta, the words undocumented duct room. The word undocumented neatly crossed out in someone else's pen. The suit's eyes were calm and very, very awake. "In my experience," the man said softly, "lines that don't exist on paper sometimes carry the most important conversations. Don't you think?" The tech opened his mouth to answer, but the only thing he could hear, under the hum of the switches and the polite tone of the stranger's voice, was the phantom phrase still echoing in his inner ear. "Black Road confirmed stable." It was about to become anything but. They didn't take him to his supervisor's office. They walked him past it, past the floor where he'd drunk bad coffee for 20 years, up one more level, to a corridor he'd seen only once before, during a fire drill, when everyone laughed about the floor with no labels. The men in suits didn't laugh. One of them swiped a card through a reader that hadn't existed 6 months ago. A door clicked. Inside, a small room, a table, 4 chairs, a wall clock, and a metal cabinet humming softly. No company logo. The taller suit gestured to a chair. "Please," he said, "sit. We'd like to talk before your night gets noisier." The tech sat. His hands felt too big for his wrists. His badge suddenly looked cheap on his chest. The shorter man placed the maintenance log on the table between them like evidence. His finger tapped the circled line. "Route 43 Delta," he said. "Undocumented duct. Room between diplomatic exchange and international gateway, then crossed out by your supervisor." He looked up. "You remember writing this?" The tech swallowed. "Yes." "You remember listening on that same route?" the tall man added quietly. "Just now?" There it was. No point pretending he'd been testing a random crackle. "Yes," the tech said again. The tall man's mouth twitched. "Good," he said. "Let's stop lying to each other before we start. My name, for tonight, is Anton. This is my colleague." The other man gave a first name that sounded as temporary as the room. "We work," Anton said, "for the part of this country that worries about lines nobody admits exist." He tapped the log again. "You've stumbled on one of them." They didn't shout. They didn't accuse him of treason. They asked questions the way surgeons handle sharp instruments. Precise. Careful. "When did you first notice irregular traffic on 43 Delta? How many nights? What times? What made you decide to physically trace the cable?" he told them. About the usage spikes. About the flickering lamp at 2357. About the beeping tracer leading into the solid concrete on the map. About the unmarked door with the modern lock. He did not embellish. The facts were enough. The shorter man took notes. Anton listened with his head slightly tilted, as if he could hear the building's wires shifting while the tech spoke. When he finished, there was a small silence. Then Anton asked, "And tonight? What exactly did you hear on the line?" The tech closed his eyes for a moment, replayed the sound. "2 recorded briefings," he said. He named the first language, then the second. He repeated the neutral phrases, the numbers, the code words he could remember. He spoke the phrase that had made his stomach flip. "City Center Node 3, Black Road confirmed stable." He opened his eyes. "They were talking about this building," he said. "About that route. They called it a Black Road." Anton exhaled slowly. "We've heard that phrase before," he said. "In other places, on other cables. Until tonight, we did not know exactly which concrete it ran through here." The shorter man closed his notebook. "Congratulations," he said dryly. "You just confirmed a theory that has been making people upstairs very unhappy for 2 years." They didn't keep him guessing for long. Anton leaned forward, folded his hands, and spoke like someone explaining a problem to a competent colleague, not a suspect. "Here is the short version," he said. "We monitor a lot of lines in this country. Official ones, unofficial ones. The ones people think are safe because nobody has mentioned them in a newspaper." He nodded toward the ceiling. "2 foreign intelligence services. Let's not play games, you know which ones. Do not officially talk to each other directly here. They talk to embassies, to ministries, to commercial partners. On paper." He tapped the maintenance log again. "Off paper, they have built what we believe is a clandestine transit route," he said. It used to be radio, microwave, other tricks. In the last few years, we started seeing a pattern of short, highly encrypted bursts riding on top of our infrastructure. The shorter man added, "We could see the traffic at the edges, at the embassies, at an international gateway, but the middle," he shrugged, "was foggy until you drew a little circle around a trunk code." The tech stared at the logbook as if it were someone else's. "You're saying," he managed, "they're using our central switch as a private pipeline." Anton's smile was humorless. "We're saying they're using your central switch," he said, "without asking permission from you, from us, or from anyone who officially owns the wires." He sat back, which is impolite even by Cold War standards. "So you'll just cut it," the tech said. "Pull the cable, close the room, that's it." Both men shook their heads at once. "If we cut it now," the shorter man said, "they know we've found it. They stop using it. They look for something else, somewhere harder to see." "And we lose," Anton finished, "our one piece of leverage." He studied the tech for a moment. "You work nights," he said. "You know how the city sounds when nobody's listening. That line has been out of the paperwork longer than we've been in our jobs. We don't know how many arrangements are built on it. If we yank it blindly, things move in the dark. We prefer to move the dark toward us." The tech rubbed his hands together slowly, trying to make them feel like they belonged to him again. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Anton's reply was simple. "Exactly what you've already been doing," he said. "Only now you'll do it on purpose." They did not ask him to spy, they asked him to notice. "You will keep working your shift," Anton said. "You will not suddenly become nervous or overly diligent. You will fix broken lines, chase noise, curse old equipment. You will not go back into that undocumented room alone. Understood?" "Yes." "In your logs," the shorter man said, "you will not write undocumented again. You will write exactly what your supervisor wants to see. Old reserve routing, no issue." He slid a small device across the table. It looked like a slightly fatter version of the handheld test set the tech already used. "This," he said, "is for your ears only. When you clip it to that particular circuit on 43 Delta, it doesn't just let you listen. It duplicates whatever passes through in real time to us upstairs." He tapped the humming metal cabinet in the corner. "Mirror line, one way." "You want me to sit on their hotline," the tech said, "and feed it to you?" "Not all night," Anton said. "Only during those windows you already mapped, the regular sessions. We have other taps at other points. We just needed this." He nodded toward the invisible room below. "To complete the picture." The tech swallowed. "And if they notice?" Anton's gaze didn't flinch. "If they notice at your end," he said calmly, "you will give us as much time as you can by being confused and obstructive. Say you thought it was a fault. Say you don't understand. Which, to be fair, is mostly true. We will handle the rest." The shorter man added, "If they notice at their end, we will see it in the traffic. And then we end the game on our terms." The next nights blurred. He worked his normal shift, checked the usual complaints. Buzzing noise on line 7. No dial tone on office trunk. Crackling on international calls. He wrote tickets, swapped cards, wiggled cables, and around 23:55 he walked, at a normal pace, to the 43 Delta frame, clipped the new test set onto the same trunk, and listened. The device stayed silent. The hall hummed. He could hear his own heart. At 23:57, the busy lamp lit. The test set pulsed once. A tiny indicator on its side glowed. Upstairs, in the unlabeled room, the cabinet hummed a little harder as the mirror woke up. In his ear, he heard the pattern he'd already learned to recognize. Tone. Silence. The two flat voices in two foreign languages, trading numbers and obscure phrases as if they weren't sharing a stolen artery. He didn't understand the content. He didn't need to. He understood the shape. Outgoing bursts lining up with tiny spikes on trunks he knew went to certain embassy basements. Incoming bursts matching jumps on trunks that led toward the other side of town. He began, without being asked, to keep a separate notebook in his locker. Not official, just times, durations, which embassy trunks twitched during which sessions. When he handed it, once a week, to Anton in room 3 on the floor with no labels, the man's grim satisfaction told him it was worth the ink. "You have a good ear," Anton said after the 3rd week, "for a man who supposedly only cares about crackling." The tech shrugged. "If you stare at numbers long enough," he said, "you notice when they move the wrong way." They weren't just listening. Somewhere above his pay grade, people were drawing lines on maps. He saw glimpses when they forgot to close folders before he walked in. Embassies circled, addresses marked with discrete crosses, arrows between phone numbers and office codes. He heard hints in their questions. "Did you notice if 43 Delta linked to Gateway B or C last Thursday?" On the night of the 12th, did any domestic trunk groups show the same pattern? The picture forming in the room was bigger than his little corner of copper, a black road that didn't just cross his building, but connected different assets on both sides of the divide, using his country's neutrality as camouflage. Somewhere in that chain, someone inside the telephone company had agreed to drill a hole in a wall, pull a cable through, and look away. When he asked once, "Who put that door there in the first place?" Anton answered with a wry tilt of his head. "Someone who got paid enough that they no longer fix phones at night," he said. "We're working on the rest." The operation had a limit. He felt it before they said it. Traffic patterns changed. The sessions became less regular, more jittery. Some nights the expected call didn't come at all. "Someone on their side is nervous," the shorter man said, staring at a graph on the wall. "Could be leaks elsewhere, could be routine paranoia. Either way, we cannot sit on this forever." Anton called him in one afternoon. Unusual time. He wasn't used to seeing the building in daylight. The blinds in room 312 were half closed. On the table lay a schematic of the switching center he knew better than his own kitchen. On it, someone had drawn a thick black line through the undocumented room, and then a red cross over it. "Tomorrow night," Anton said, "we change the road." He tapped the diagram with the back of a pen. "For one session, we will reroute their black road so that it appears to work exactly as before, but in reality passes through a controlled splitter where we can capture everything in a more detailed way." "Can't you already hear everything?" the tech asked. "Hearing is not enough," Anton said. "We need to see packet timing, modulation quirks, things that tell our colleagues in the cipher department exactly which equipment they're using and where else in the world it might be." The shorter man added, "And while that happens, other teams will be watching certain apartments, certain cars, certain embassy side doors that you have helped us identify." He looked at the tech. "Your part is simple," he said. "You will be on your normal shift. You will pretend nothing is different. You will watch 43 Delta. If they do anything unexpected, change timings, jump routes, you will call this number immediately." He slid a card across the table. It had no name, just a sequence. "If everything goes as planned," Anton said, "you will not notice any disaster. That is how we prefer it." "And if it doesn't?" the tech asked. Anton's face didn't change. "Then you will notice something," he said, "and you will give us a few seconds more than we otherwise would have." The night of the operation, the switching hall felt tighter. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe it was the extra inspectors in company overalls whose boots were too clean and whose eyes watched the wrong things. He did his job. He took complaints. He swapped cards. He cursed an old relay that stuck. He made everything look exactly the way it always had. At 2350, he walked past 43 Delta and pretended not to look directly at it. At 2355, he finally clipped his test set on. The busy lamp was dark. Upstairs, men and women in another unlabeled room watched other lamps. Screens glowed with load balances, error counts, status flags. Somewhere outside, cars idled in quiet streets near quiet buildings. At 2357, the lamp lit. In his ear, the tone burst came. The test set's mirror light blinked, feeding the signal into the controlled splitter the engineers had threaded into the circuit over the last week. From his point of view, nothing was different. From theirs, every nuance of the handshake, every quirk of the encryption stream was being recorded at much finer resolution. The briefings rolled. The two flat voices, the familiar pattern of code words, numbers, timestamps. His hand stayed steady on the test set. If they changed frequency or jumped to another path mid-session, he had to see it before any automated system could. They didn't. They trusted the wire. Trusted the black road. 3 minutes. Tone. Silence. The lamp went dark. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Somewhere above, pens started moving faster on paper. Radios murmured orders. Engines turned over. Doors opened and closed far from his hall of blinking lights. His part of the war was over for the night. He went back to a complaint about a crackling line in a taxi company. They didn't tell him details, not officially. He recognized the aftermath in the small stories. An embassy rotation announced earlier than expected. A senior trade representative suddenly reassigned. A quiet article about a mid-level employee in the telecommunications ministry arrested for corruption and abuse of office, with no further explanation. The detective from the regular police, the one who sometimes brought burglary films to the photo lab in another life entirely, came through the switching center a week later on some errand. He caught the tech by the coffee machine, nodded toward the ceiling, and said, "Busy week for diplomats," with the same dry tone he'd once used in another story about passports. Later, in room 312, Anton filled in what he could. "Your Black Road," he said, "was not the only one, but it was a main branch. Through it, we mapped who spoke when, from where, and about what kinds of ops. When we pulled that thread, other knots came loose." He shuffled a few papers. "We closed that room, rerouted legitimate traffic, removed the rogue patching. Some of the people who built it will be spending the next years explaining their creativity to a judge. Others have left the country with fewer privileges than they had before." He closed the folder. "Will this stop them completely?" he asked, then answered his own question. "No, they will build something else. Somewhere else. But not through your racks, and not without us looking harder this time." He looked at the tech. "For what it's worth," he said, "you did well." The tech shrugged. "I drew a circle around a number," he said. "You did the rest." Anton's smile this time had a trace of something almost like warmth. "Most people don't draw circles at all," he said. "They just assume the map is always right." He didn't get a medal. He got a restructuring. 6 months later, the telecom company modernized. Digital switches were coming. Old electromechanical frames were being replaced. So were some of the people who knew them best. He was called into an office with a new manager who used words like streamlining and cost efficiency and transition to packet-based services. They offered him a package. Early retirement, they called it. even though he didn't feel early anything. The official reason on the paper, redundancy due to technological upgrade. Nothing about the fact that his hands had once sat on a wire two foreign services thought belonged to them. Nothing about his little pencil circle. He signed. He turned in his badge. He took his last walk through the switching hall, now half empty, some frames already dark, cables hanging loose. He paused for a moment by the spot where 43 Delta used to sit. The panel was gone. In its place, a sleek gray block of equipment hummed softly, blinking with new, anonymous LEDs. No more mechanical lamps. No more physical sense of a single trunk being busy. Everything was buried in software now. He put his hand on the side of the rack, felt the faint vibration. "Good luck," he murmured to whatever poor bastard would have to trust a screen instead of his ears. Then he left. Years later, the story surfaced in a way that made it sound almost fictional. A foreign magazine ran a long piece titled something like, "Secret Cold War Hotline ran through the neutral city's phone system, sources say." It had diagrams, anonymous quotes, descriptions of a clandestine link between rival intelligence services, routed through an unsuspecting nation's main exchange. One paragraph said, "The breakthrough reportedly came when a night technician noticed unexplained activity on a supposedly idle trunk and followed the physical cable to an unmarked room between two major nodes." The article called him a night technician. No name, no face, just a role. He read it at his kitchen table, now in a smaller apartment, with newer wiring in the walls that carried data he didn't try to understand. On the street below, people stared at their phones instead of talking through handsets. His son, now grown, worked in network security, which seemed to involve staring at graphs on a screen and saying words like firewall and protocol. When his son once complained about phantom traffic in a network diagram, the old man smiled without explaining why the phrase made him feel nostalgic and tired at the same time. He didn't say, "I once followed phantom traffic into a hole in the wall and found a piece of someone else's war." He just asked, "So, did you find where it really went?" His son shrugged. "Eventually," he said, "it was nothing, just a misconfigured route." "Sometimes," the old man said quietly, "it's nothing. Sometimes it's not." His son didn't ask what he meant. He didn't push. That was fine. Not every story needed to be told out loud. Officially, the case lived in a file with a stamped title like, "On the Disruption of an Unauthorized International Communications Channel." Somewhere in the middle of that thick folder, probably on page 37, there was a line that read, "Anomaly first noted by night technician at Central Switching Center. See maintenance log entry ref 43 Delta." To most people, it was a footnote. To him, it had been the moment when the neat abstract map of the network in his head suddenly revealed teeth. In the end, all the reports and briefings and diplomatic notes boiled down to something much smaller and simpler. One tired man in a gray shirt refusing to believe that a line that didn't exist on paper was none of his business. The missiles, the embassies, the code machines, the agents. All of that lived on charts and in history books. The black road through his switching hall was gone now. Cut, rerouted, documented, buried under upgrades and software. But sometimes, when he heard the faint buzz of a distant call through an open window, he couldn't help thinking not about the conversations people meant to have, but about the ones that were never supposed to be heard at all, and about the simple, stubborn little pencil mark that had turned a secret between two superpowers into a problem they could no longer pretend they didn't share.